as the Lithuanian flag was raised and they sang the national anthem once banned by the communists. Lithuania proclaimed that it had returned to the status it enjoyed up until the Soviet Red Army invaded in 1940. But as Mikhail Gorbachev opened the session, he termed the Lithuanian vote alarming. The decisions taken infringe on the eventual fate of the republic, its people, and the whole country.
Kremlin spokesman Gennady Gerasimov echoed Mr. Gorbachev's reaction to Lithuania's self-proclaimed secession.
By itself, it's very small. It's only a little bit more than 1% territory-wise, a little bit more than 1% population-wise, a little bit more than 2% industry-wise and agriculture-wise. So it is small. But Lithuania is the first and creates a precedent which can vary. And also, who likes separatists? You cannot expect Moscow or Soviets like separatists.
A note signed by Lithuania's leaders refused Gorbachev's demand last Friday to retract their independence declaration. Over the weekend, the battle of nerves intensified as Soviet armored cars were placed on the border, Air Force planes flew over the capital, and
hours the Republic reaffirmed its decision to break away from Moscow. Amid increasing tensions, Lithuania is calling the Kremlin's bluff today, Tuesday, March the 20th, 1990.
Soviet disunion, Lithuania and the Kremlin are staring each other down. The small Baltic Republic demanding independence, the huge superpower insisting on unity. The talk out of Moscow is tough. The question is, how far will Mikhail Gorbachev go to back it up? Tom Bennett reports from Moscow.
Lithuania is not knuckling under to Gorbachev. It is not intimidated. President Landsbergis is under heavy pressure. Today he was saying Lithuania takes the warning from Gorbachev as an invitation to negotiate.
When the officials in Moscow will be more reasonable.
Lithuanians are well aware the USSR can be very unreasonable.
The power's in their hands.
A visiting American teacher, Anita Lee from Plano, Texas.
Their feeling is that they will have independence, whatever the cost.
The breakaway Baltic Republic, but Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze has given an assurance that force will not be used against independence movements.
After the talks, Baker indicated Shevardnadze had given even stronger assurances in private that the Soviets would resolve their crisis peacefully.
He said that force would not be the solution as far as the Soviet Union is concerned. They want to solve the problem through dialogue. He said that several times. And as I've said before, there's no reason that we know of not to take him at his word.
Government there defying Mikhail Gorbachev's order to surrender firearms and impose stricter visa and border checks. President Gorbachev issued the decree under the new powers accorded him last week, but leaders say it has no force in the rebel republic because it's left the Soviet Union. And as Rick Inderfirth reports, young Lithuanian conscripts are leaving the Soviet army in droves.
Designed as a show of force, the biggest display of Soviet military power in Lithuania since it proclaimed independence. The Red Army calls it legitimate maneuvers on territory it still considers to be part of the Soviet Union. Residents call it provocative, a foreign army, they say, on foreign soil. But it's still not known if today's military activity means reinforcements are arriving. The man under relentless pressure as a result of Moscow's tactics is the Lithuanian president Vytautas Landsbergis. This morning he attacked Moscow's order to surrender weapons to the military.
It's a pity that this order was done. I think it's a mistake.
The Lithuanian parliament is doing its best to ignore the threat.
Moscow is fast approaching another climax. A Kremlin deadline for the return of deserters to the Red Army is looming. Foreign correspondents have been barred from entering Lithuania, and 2 US diplomats have been expelled from the rebel republic. Neil Ross reports that President Gorbachev may be under pressure from his own military to end the impasse.
Psychological warfare above Lithuania. Soviet helicopters rain down demands for an end to independence. Look, Gorbachev signed it, this woman says. He ought to be ashamed. Why doesn't he leave us alone? No chance of that. Soviet army commanders enter the rebellious parliament on the trail of deserters from the Red Army. The Kremlin's generals are also there, seeking answers to President Gorbachev's other ultimatums, the disarming and disbanding of Lithuania's volunteer forces. Haunted by the drone of helicopters and the clatter of army boots, the Lithuanian parliament continues to defy Moscow. A former KGB official is named as a new minister in the government. Will you obey only our constitution, demands the president, yes or no? Yes, replies the ex-KGB officer. Is Russian law valid here? No, he says. Relief at the brave words. There's growing concern in the White House that the situation in Lithuania is worsening. For the third time this week, President Bush calls for a negotiated end to the crisis.
Any attempt to coerce or intimidate or forcibly intervene against the Lithuanian people is bound to backfire.
In this David and Goliath battle, there are many eyes awaiting the outcome. Half a dozen other Soviet republics have also been campaigning for independence. We are watching Lithuania, says this Moldavian deputy, to see the price of independence. If it's too high, we'll have to wait. Moscow's pledges of non-violence run parallel with images of great power.
And the Lithuanian president has appealed to the West for help.
Soviet paratroopers stormed this hospital in Vilnius just a few hours ago, abducting over a dozen deserters from the Russian army. The violence of the attack is evident in the fresh blood on the stairs and the broken doors. Eyewitnesses said the corridor was green with Russian soldiers as they pushed their way past security guards and nurses. The Lithuanian deserters had taken refuge in this hospital on the advice of Lithuanian leaders. They were allegedly under the protection of the Red Cross here.
There is a sense of restrained optimism in Vilnius this morning, matched by sunny spring weather here, that Moscow may be ready to deal with the breakaway republic with words, not troops. Armed Soviet soldiers still occupy the 3 buildings claimed by Moscow, but Lithuania's deputy prime minister says the talks he had with unidentified Soviet authorities Tuesday have renewed hopes for a negotiated settlement to the crisis. But rumors continue to circulate that troops may yet be ordered to seize other buildings, like the television station.
How much faith, sir, do you have in President Gorbachev's stated intention to not use force unless lives are threatened?
Kiek jūs pasitikit Gorbačiovo pareiškimą, kad jėga nebus naudojama nebent gyvybės bus pavojuje?
This condition in which the force can be used is very dangerous, because the Soviet troops can make these conditions themselves, and so they can later use the force.
What do you say, sir, to the criticism that you seem to be forcing Mikhail Gorbachev to choose between use of force or loss of face?
It's unreasonable.
Mr. President, are you satisfied so far with Washington's understated reaction to events in Lithuania?
Ar jūs patenkintas ligšiolinę Vašingtono tokia santūrė reakcija?
We are waiting for more strong support.
For the Soviet perspective on Lithuania, let's go to Washington now to welcome Oleg Durkovsky. He is a counselor at the Soviet Embassy. Mr. Durkovsky, good morning.
Good morning.
Moscow has promised not to use force. As you've just heard, President Landsbergis intends to hold firm. Where does that leave your government?
Well, primarily we are talking about ensuring law and order. And this is a very important point I would like to underline. Law and order. And we hope that other countries who do care about maintaining law and order in their own countries would understand the developments with regard to the situation in Lithuania.
Okay, but you've still got a standoff, and everybody's talking of a peaceful solution. What's even possible that both sides could live with?
Well, what is possible and what has been suggested by the Congress of People's Deputies in their decision several days ago is a peaceful, calm resolution of the conflict on the basis of respecting the Soviet Constitution, which is the supreme law in the Soviet Union and which takes precedence over any other legal matters.
President Gorbachev promised force wouldn't be used unless lives were threatened. How then do you defend the bloody seizure of so-called deserters yesterday?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as a bloody seizure. It also should be viewed in the context of an attempt of legal power to restore order. First of all, it was not bloody, and I would dispute with you on this issue.
And there are conflicting reports out of Lithuania that it was quite bloody and quite violent.
Well, you know, the question would be valid here. What steps would be taken in other countries with regard to deserters? It's a question of law and order. I'd like to repeat it again.
Lithuanian leaders refuse to back down from their...
He can't afford to be seen as giving in completely to those stubborn Lithuanians. But on the other hand, he can't ignore world opinion. A spokesperson for President Gorbachev ruled out an economic blockade, but he nevertheless sounded as though sanctions were still a possibility.
It's not a threat, it's warning. It is, you see, people should know that it's not all the roses which are waiting for them on that rather risky and adventurous road they have been taken by their leadership. It's very friendly, very serious, and very considered warning that it is road to peril. It's not road to roses, to well-being, to flourishing, to, I don't know, to become another Sweden overnight.
One idea hatched in the Kremlin has been to starve Lithuania of raw materials and energy. The British Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd arrived in the Soviet Union aware of Moscow's preoccupation with Lithuania. He too was in a peculiar position because Britain, like most of the West, is extremely concerned with President Gorbachev's political survival. Lithuanian independence, in the short term at least, has been relegated into second place. Mr. Hurd was being very, very careful.
President Gorbachev is clear about the intense international interest in this subject, and I would say extremely anxious to deal with the matter through an orderly and legal process.
Did you express concern about economic sanctions?
that he was taking?
Yeah, I think I'd better not go into the detail.
But by week's end, it was still clear the Lithuanian problem remains a real threat to Mr. Gorbachev.
I think that Gorbachev really needs quiet solution. But I understand that if the separation of Lithuania will be very quick, he'll be strongly attacked from right, including army. If it will be very, very slowly, he'll be attacked from the left, including foreign governments. I think situation is very dangerous.
The past several weeks have been a severe testing time for Lithuania's new nationalist leaders. The pressure from Moscow has been enormous. The West has, for the most part, been unable to witness what the Lithuanian people as a whole have been going through, the strong-arm tactics, the daily intimidation. One of the first things Moscow did when the Lithuanians proved uncommonly strong-minded about their independence was to invite Western journalists to go elsewhere.
They like to show you Lenin's statue in Vilnius, not because of any loyalty to Lenin, but because if you get the angle right, the architect of today's Soviet Union is seen holding a cross. Lithuanians need all the humor they can muster to cope with the kind of problems they have today, just weeks after they announced their unilateral declaration of independence. So far, the changes have been mainly cosmetic in this handsome city that once ruled an empire of its own 500 years ago. Like across the road from KGB headquarters, where the street nameplate has been changed from Avenue of the Revolution to the name of a Lithuanian national hero. And the banners that proclaim that without independence, Lithuania has no future. But beyond the brave proclamations, people here and in the other Baltic republics are being harassed and persecuted by the Soviet authorities in a desperate attempt to keep the Soviet empire intact.
We don't want to serve in an army of occupation. We want our own Lithuanian army.
As the Soviets desperately try to bring the Republic and its unruly young to heel, they warn that civil disobedience will be punished with imprisonment.
It's nonsense to go back to the events of the Second World War and say that the annexation of the Baltic states was illegal. The Baltic states are part of the Soviet Union, and they must remain part of the Soviet Union.
People complain that they're being terrorized by convoys of troops hurtling through small Lithuanian villages at night.
Gorbachev is like Stalin. It's like the terror of the 1940s. Lithuania is so small. We're no threat to the Soviet Union. Gorbachev isn't a democrat. He's an imperialist. They're trying to destabilize the situation here, to show the world that Lithuania can't cope with independence.
The militia in unmarked cars changes shift outside the newspaper office. The editor says it's like working with a gun at his head. He never knows when Moscow will order the building to be occupied or simply cut off the supplies of ink and paper to stop the pro-independence newspapers. Meanwhile, at the television station, the Communist Party organizes a demonstration calling for an end to pro-Moscow propaganda there. It's a disappointing turnout. The organizers had hoped for several thousand supporters. Only a few hundred Communist Party loyalists turn out, shouting worn-out party slogans. The Russian minority here is losing its appetite for confrontation. But while ordinary Russians may be prepared to stand back and observe the pace of events, the extremists call for the television station to be closed and for the media to be controlled by Moscow. Again this week, the Lithuanian parliament has reaffirmed its independence and called for the Soviet army to leave. Lithuania's President Landsbergis has called for calm and for people to ignore provocation from Moscow. On the streets, the agreed tactic now is for people to picket the buildings they believe may be threatened by Soviet troops. Within minutes of a rumor circulating the city that a public building may be invaded, thousands surround the building, defying the Soviet army to enter. Independence leaders call on people to keep their nerve and to believe that the will of the people must, in the end, triumph over tyranny. They warn that Moscow intends to step up the pressure with more economic and political sanctions, and that the struggle for independence will be a hard one. Delegations from other friendly Soviet republics make their way through the crowd to offer support. Republics like Estonia, Latvia, Georgia and the Ukraine, who are also fighting for independence. A speaker from the Ukraine says that Lithuania is the first bird to fly from the Soviet nest, and now other republics want to follow. Lithuania may be leading the way today, but Moscow is determined to make the going tough. More Soviet troops are being moved into the area, and the dream of independence for these people may be a long way from reality yet. Sue Lloyd-Roberts for SBS Dateline in Vilnius, Lithuania.
Now the deadline to repeal independence legislation has passed. ABC correspondent John Lombard.
Lithuanians waited out the Soviet deadline in prayer. They gathered for Easter services, President Landsbergis telling them to try to enjoy their holiday and forget what he called Moscow's unwelcome Easter present. In a televised address, the country's top cleric urged Lithuanians to remain calm but resolute. There was no immediate move by Moscow to implement its threatened fuel blockade, but motorists are taking no chances, queuing to stock up on petrol. Soviet attention focused instead on the United States. A commentary in the Communist Party Daily Pravda warned Washington not to jeopardize the thaw in East-West relations by siding with Lithuania, saying it would be reckless to throw worldwide perestroika under the feet of Lithuanian nationalists who have lost their sense of reality and responsibility. Returning from his Easter break, President Bush said he would not speculate on a U.S. response until Moscow acted on its ultimatum.
Baltic states' independence claim. After a government meeting, the Lithuanian president has telegrammed Mikhail Gorbachev asking for another meeting to discuss a compromise.
In an interview after the meeting, Lithuania's Prime Minister said her government was prepared to compromise on three key issues: conscription of young Lithuanians for military service, the rights of Soviet citizens in Lithuania, and continued Soviet ownership of Communist Party property. Further, she promised Lithuania would not retaliate by holding back supplies of manufactured goods for the rest of the Soviet Union.
The Prime Minister and Foreign Minister have already gone to Norway seeking alternative fuel supplies.
Soviet troops stepped up the war of nerves by briefly deploying near an oil pumping station. Later came word from an engineer at the Lithuanian Mazeiki refinery that the flow of oil had been cut. The Republic has 2 to 3 weeks reserves of fuel. But petrol queues are growing and appeals are being made not to waste heat or electricity. The Lithuanian parliament earlier tried to avoid a showdown by offering a 2-week freeze on any further anti-Soviet legislation. The Bush administration said it was seeking independent confirmation
on Lithuania, with reports it's cut food supplies to the Republic's ports. There have also been violent scenes in the capital as Soviet troops seized control of the Communist Party's printing works.
Angry already at the grip Moscow now has on their country, Lithuanian independence supporters today fought back as Soviet soldiers occupied a printing plant in Vilnius. The troops beat anyone who resisted. The crowd outside became a taunting, jeering mob, shouting fascists at the soldiers. The day after cutting off 84% of Lithuania's natural gas and all of its oil, the Soviets made it clear what kind of hardball they intend to play.
Force against rebel Republic Lithuania if necessary. The warning came as the rebel Republic's Prime Minister was seeking support in Scandinavia.
Leadership have welcomed a Franco-German initiative to ease tensions. President Mitterrand of France and West Germany's Chancellor Kohl suggested earlier this week that Lithuania temporarily suspend some of its new anti-Kremlin laws.
The blockade is tightening. Even the supply of coal to the Republic has now been halted. Moscow making it clear that it can, by economic means alone, crush Lithuania's dream of independence. As the factories run short of fuel supplies, the human anguish is already being felt. The prospect of mass unemployment is rising, with real fear of hardship ahead. But to the Lithuanian leadership, the Kremlin is simultaneously signaling it wants a political solution. Talk of compromise, of dialogue, now dominating the endless round of meetings. President Landsbergis still telling Moscow independence will stay, everything else is negotiable. Also meeting today were the ethnic Russians, who are already complaining that independent Lithuania is ignoring them.
The new Latvian Prime Minister said the Baltic states must close ranks in their struggle. And in Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev has publicly criticised his own countrymen, who are fed up with the Kremlin.
Mikhail Gorbachev was addressing army veterans today, and he used the occasion to denounce what he described as extremists who disrupted last week's May Day parade in Moscow. Demonstrators who followed the official march shouted "Resign, resign" at Kremlin leaders watching from the Lenin Mausoleum. Mr. Gorbachev said perestroika was approaching a critical point, and he condemned separatists who are pursuing an irresponsible policy leading to deadlock.
And it's now a crime in the Soviet Union to slander or insult the president.
And has appealed to the West for help.
The moment Moscow fell back on the old ways to deal with defiance is captured in these pictures, snatched by Lithuanian cameramen as their own TV station was overrun. The intent, a bloody lesson that the Republic's declaration of independence was a myth they should stop believing in. But the brutality has brought a stiffening of resolve in Vilnius. A dad's army of militiamen guards the parliament building, and its defences are still being strengthened daily, as are the ranks of those ready day and night for the Red Army assault they seriously expect to face.
Maybe with our sticks, with our knives only,
we can do something.
Lithuania's leader wants Western countries to put pressure on the Soviet Union.
Why do you not want to help us?
The future will be different, she says. Lithuania will exist, and the good people of the world will help us. Even many ethnic Russians voted for independence. If we live on Lithuanian land, says Valentina Seskova, we have to support the Lithuanian nation. Outside the barricaded parliament today, patriotic songs.
I don't believe people are suicidal. Any attempt to break up the country would be a disaster for us and the whole world.
Those who had dealt with Gorbachev over the years were sympathetic. Margaret Thatcher, a personal friend, had no doubts who was behind his downfall.
So the whole world will be watching very carefully indeed what happens to Mr. Gorbachev. This is an old-fashioned style attempt at a coup, belonging to the Stalin and Brezhnev era, to keep people by tanks and the army and the KGB.
World leaders, including President Bush, have been taken by surprise. They're scurrying to gather what scraps of information they can about the coup which has toppled their ally. The new battle for democracy in the Soviet Union is about to begin. Now the Soviet people have been given a taste of freedom, they won't give it up easily. The troops are out on the streets to stop the uprisings, but recent elections have shown the majority want democracy.
In the last hour, a huge crowd has gathered outside the Russian Federation building. Tens of thousands of Muscovites responding to Boris Yeltsin's call to defend their parliament. It was the largest rally since the coup and illegal under the new state of emergency regulations. Last night, some tanks even flew the Russian rather than Soviet flag.
And once again, we have to start off by saying the news, the twists and the events are still coming out of the Soviet Union, where communism is in the process of collapsing. Today's top story, the military advisor to Mikhail Gorbachev, Marshal Akramayov, has committed suicide. This following the coup attempt this past week. We'll be getting to that and a lot of other stories.
11 Republic leaders, including Boris Yeltsin, have signed an accord creating a Commonwealth of independent states, ending the reign of President Mikhail Gorbachev. The new Commonwealth has yet to announce who'll control the nuclear arsenal. US Secretary of State James Baker has called an international conference to organise more food and medical aid.